Welcome to the next in the Knowledge Mobilization Flash Talk series. This is a series that is in partnership with the Wisconsin Center for Education Research, along with the Department of Public Instruction, and we have support from the United States Department of Education as well. Today, we are fortunate we're joined by Jadelle Davis. She is a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology at UW-Madison. She also works closely with DPI on a number of different projects, including the one that we're going to hear about today. So thank you so much, Jadelle, for being here, and I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you.
Yay, thank you, Annalie. Thank y'all for joining. Super excited. I'm long-winded, so I'm gonna try to do this really well. So that's me. So today's title, What Makes an Evidence Base Racially Equitable? And so what we're talking today about is a tool, a rubric explicitly, that will hopefully help us get to identifying and evaluating studies and evidence that for equity. So what is it? So the Title I team and other folks at DPI and Wisconsin Evaluation Collaborative are at WCER are partnered in this work. So the racial equity rubric at its most basic level is a tool to evaluate strategies, interventions, and research studies. And like any other rubric, it's a tool that sets specific standards and evaluates the extent to which the thing being evaluated meets those standards. So this rubric is largely an additional review process. So most research and evaluation studies in particular have already been through a peer review process, or even if it hasn't, it's publishing, it's had some eyes on it. So this rubric then sifts from there. So it's part of a process within DPI to identify studies, interventions for a repository of improvement strategies that educators at any level, in any context, can access. So this is DPI saying, look here to gather the strategies you need to make improvements in your schools, districts, community centers, educative space writ large. So the key part of this rubric is that the pool of resources that educators can draw from will have been filtered through this rubric to say, here is the extent to which this improvement strategy demonstrates outcomes that are racially equitable and has a research design, a methodology, the way they collect data, the way they analyze the data, their intention in sampling, all of these things that being based in and advancing racial equity. So before we go to the core goals for this rubric, I want us to sit briefly with our call to action. And this is our big why. We're still crafting this as an official statement, but much of this big why has to do with the question of why racial equity in the first place. So we'll stay with that. And so we know equity gets thrown around a lot these days, and hopefully we have a shared understanding of equity as a fundamental acknowledgement of and response to historical and ongoing conditions of inequality, where the response to such unequal conditions, which is what we live in and have always lived in, is to have norms and policies in place that ensure that everyone has access to the same opportunities, not based on equal treatment. So we can't respond to inequality by treating everyone the same, but according to what folks need. So thinking about what folks need, we center racial equity because in these United States, race is a core indicator of life outcomes, regardless of other intersecting identities such as class, gender, sexuality, all these things are experienced differently according to your racial identity, how you are identified in the world. You experience the world differently, regardless of those other intersecting identities. So because of this, we must address race in order to truly account for and address unequal conditions in the United States and globally. So given the basis of our call to action, our goals for the rubric are studies for evidence and equity standards, ongoing accountability to the specific focus on equity as we review the evidence for improvement strategy, use of this evidence and equity standards when working with communities to build an evidence base for things they feel are truly equity centered and making a difference. And then finally to create a user-friendly guide for general access. So let's jump to the rubric itself. So on the rubric, there are 5 dimensions to the rubric, and these are those. So it's context, description, research question/issue presentation, study design and data collection, data analysis and interpretation, and finally findings and outcomes. So each dimension has a specific component, and each component comes with ratings along 4 levels that indicate the extent to which the evidence being evaluated meets the specific standards of racial equity that this rubric lays out. So here's an example. Bless my screenshots. So this is dimension 3, which evaluates the study design and data collection. So you can see here the components. So design choice, racial composition of research team, sampling choices, internal validity of data collection instruments, external validity of data collection instruments. You can also see here the 4 rating levels. So we have at the bottom area, absent, stage 1 minimal, stage 2 approaching, stage 3 exemplary practice. So each component has a rating level and a brief summary of what constitutes each of those rating levels. And so now we're just gonna, for our brief example, we'll hone in on sampling choices, a component that speaks to who gets targeted to participate in the study, which populations, which world experiences, researchers, evaluators, community folks are hearing from to draw conclusions about what is needed, what works, which understandings count. So this matters. So moving from the ideal on down, exemplary practice is data collection includes large samples, oversampling of underrepresented community members, especially racially minoritized people. Researchers include details of methods for trust building and other considerations for increased participation among underrepresented groups. Approaching is data collection includes oversampling of underrepresented community members, no details included of trust building and considerations from increased participation among underrepresented groups. Minimal is researchers do not oversample underrepresented community members as part of the data collection. Consideration of findings given the sample composition is discussed in retrospect, so just in the discussion section. And then absent is researchers do not oversample underrepresented community members as part of data collection. It relies on disaggregation during analytic phase. So we're setting up these standards and walking through what this looks like. So I'll note this, the rubric represents an ideal that we don't expect to be fully embodied by existing research and evaluation. What we are intending to do is articulate a standard for racially equitable inputs and outcomes, to really highlight studies that do parts of this well currently, to distinguish racial equity among outcomes, especially those that might be heavily promoted, but that draw conclusions from populations whose experiences and challenges do not map onto particularly racially minoritized folks and communities. And finally, to promote this as a checklist for potential research so that their study design and process can be checked against these type of priorities as they're building and constructing and carrying out their research. Other things to note, so this work is in development. We're drafting and checking in with stakeholders and revising as we go along. And the vision is to have multiple versions of this depending on the user. So from researchers and evaluators to community-based and school-based educators so that they can comprehensively consider what their improvement strategies are with racial equity in mind. I did not time myself, but I hope that was within. All right, great, okay. So, so for our breakout, we want to present, shout out to Sister Hazel, this juicy question for discussion that could help inform our process and our approach to building this out. So we would like for you to capture responses in the Jamboard that Annalie is going to paste in the chat. And those are the questions. I just want to know for the Jamboard, there are 3 boards to toggle through, and you'll see a screenshot of the first one, and at the very top here, you'll toggle through the questions at the top of each Jamboard. So here are the questions. First, what are people struggling with when you hear about this? Where is the dissonance happening for you? Next, what sounds fruitful? You can toggle to the next board. What sounds fruitful in this? And then finally, in the third board, have you seen anything like this? We're also gathering, we're in conversation with the authors of a wonderful paper that really we drew from to create and flesh out this rubric. So we're trying to gather ideas of who's doing this, what's going on there. And then, so as you're noting, please use the the little stickies in the Jamboard to write down your ideas. This would be really helpful for us as we move forward. And that's it.